It's difficult to imagine a motorcycle world where Harley doesn't exist. I guess maybe not for those of you who are in India or maybe Sweden, but here in America, Harley is not just an American brand or even an American motorcycle company. Harley is America in a very real sense, or at least it's supposed to be. But Harley-Davidson hasn't been doing great over the past few years, and especially lately. Harley's stock over the past 10 years has fallen more than Tesla's has in the past year. In short, the sales aren't there for Harley, with them posting massive losses as of date, major Harley dealerships closing across the country, and a strong kind of distaste for the brand in general, and also just a bunch of other compelling brands, selling motorcycles in America. My question is this really anything new for Harley? Harley's had their fair share of struggles through their 100 plus year history. Can we look back to get a better understanding of how Harley faces these kinds of struggles and these identity crises so that we can better answer the question of whether or not Harley is dying? Let's take a step back to the 1970s and another similarly not so great time for Harley. In 1969, Harley-Davidson found itself in financial trouble and was acquired by American Machine and Foundry, or AMF, a company known for producing everything from bowling equipment to bicycles. Initially, things looked like they were on the up. This acquisition gave Harley financial relief. Ultimately, though, AMF's corporate strategy really emphasized mass production over craftsmanship in a very un-Harley fashion, and so quality control suffered, and many of the models themselves during this time just weren't great. Harley motorcycles from this era were plagued with oil leaks, electrical failures, and unreliable components, issues that really tarnished the brand's reputation, especially as Japanese competition, from the likes of Honda, they were making motorcycles that were better in almost every category. And riders who were previously committed to Harley made their way to these new dealerships. These companies were producing motorcycles that were not only cheaper, but also far more reliable and technologically advanced. In the end, Harley riders just wanted to ride, but it was becoming difficult to justify spending more for what Harley had to offer, products that were beginning to look about a decade behind in the same way that the British bikes had. And then on top of this, over time, the Japanese manufacturers would begin making Harley-esque motorcycles. Meanwhile, Harley's workforce became increasingly frustrated with AMF's cost-cutting measures, leading to a major strike in '74 that really disrupted production. The combination of poor reliability, worker unrest, and just better competition left Harley in probably its most dire state by the late 1970s. By 1981, Harley-Davidson was pretty much on the brink of collapse. Sales were in a free fall, much like they are today, and the company's reputation was at an all-time low. Recognizing the dire situation, a group of Harley executives led by Vaughn Beals and Willie G. Davidson executed a leveraged buyout to regain control of Harley-Davidson from AMF, but independence alone didn't solve Harley's problems. The new leadership faced massive challenges, with the company struggling to compete against these Japanese rivals. One of Harley's most critical lifelines came in 1983 when it successfully lobbied the US government for a protective tariff on large Japanese motorcycles. This tariff imposed a 45% duty on imported bikes over 700 cc's, which gave Harley, kind of breathing room. Though controversial, the tariff provided the company time to implement reforms and improve its motorcycles without being overwhelmed by foreign competition. Whether or not this was actually good for Harley, that is kind of getting bailed out by the government, it's difficult to say. This kind of help doesn't exactly inspire innovation. It's not that Harley learned to necessarily make better motorcycles at a more affordable price to compete. Without the government's intervention, there's a good chance that Harley would have gone the same way as the rest of the British industry, just, a bit later than them. Ultimately, though, Harley needed to rebuild its reputation. The company adopted new manufacturing techniques, things like just-in-time production, which had been pioneered by Japanese automakers. This system helped reduce waste, it improved efficiency, and it really helped with the quality of Harley's motorcycles. But perhaps the most significant development was the introduction of the Evolution engine in '84. This V-twin power plant was more reliable, it was more powerful, and way more efficient than its predecessors. And it kind of signaled Harley's return to form. Innovation, but in a thoroughly American way. Alongside engineering improvements, the company also refined its marketing strategy. They embraced their heritage, and they cultivated this kind of Harley lifestyle. Rather than trying to compete directly with Japanese bikes on price and technology, they positioned themselves as kind of the ultimate American brand, appealing to riders who valued tradition, craftsmanship, and customization. In In the end, Harley's salvation in the 1980s, aside from the government sort of eliminating competition for a short period of time, it centered around building brand identity and loyalty. Willie G knew what Harley meant to riders, and he worked tirelessly to bring Harley into the future while maintaining that identity. He focused on making Harley-Davidson a sort of cultural icon. He positioned Harley as a symbol of freedom and rebellion, and just American pride, appealing to riders who valued heritage over just horsepower. In 1983, he helped create the Harley Owners Group, or HOG. This, of course, helped to bring more community and just lifelong loyalty. Instead of distancing Harley from black leather and tattoos and the outlaw image, Willie G embraced all of that stuff, making the brand really stand out. As the lead designer for Harley, he also embraced a philosophy that really revived Harley's signature factory custom style. This made it possible for the motorcycles themselves to be much more about identity and character than just raw performance, and the motorcycles he designed leaned into this philosophy. Bikes like the FX Superglide and the Lowrider. These motorcycles would serve as kind of platforms that encouraged customers to, change their bikes and make them their own, something that is still such a huge part of Harley's brand identity. The Heritage Softail merged 1940s styling with modern engineering, emphasizing Harley's timeless design. During the 1980s crisis, Harley leaned into its Made in America, Made in USA narrative. They framed the company as a kind of patriotic lifestyle brand that went far beyond just motorcycles. And Willie G helped turn Harley into essentially a fashion brand on top of being a motorcycle brand. Building up things like Daytona Bike Week and Sturgis. It's really Willie G's vision for Harley that transformed them from a struggling company into the enduring American cultural icon that they are. If you were to ask a Harley rider in, say, the 90s or the 2000s why they love Harley, they wouldn't give you some sort of detailed breakdown of Harley's models and why their specific bike fits their kind of riding, the way that, say, a BMW or Honda rider would. No, they would probably explain that Harley as a brand and, the motorcycles they make kind of represent their own values, freedom, independence, and a life out on the open road. The result of Willie G and others' work at Harley is an almost unheard of level of brand awareness. As the 2000s carried on, multiple studies would be done showing that Harley-Davidson had arguably the single best brand recognition and brand identity in the world, like of any brand, not just motorcycle companies and manufacturers. As John Westlake says in his great book on Harley, loyalty to a brand is one thing, but having a company logo tattooed on your body, as many Harley owners do, takes things to a whole new level. By 2004, that is Harley's 100-year anniversary, the company was experiencing massive growth in sales, and just a few years later, they would hit an all-time high in terms of total revenue, including loan operations and everything. But then the world would go to crap in 2008. Harley was honestly in their own kind of bubble alongside the economy. Their motorcycles were very expensive. Many were taking out giant loans for these huge baggers, people that probably shouldn't have. And also in general, Harley's customer base was growing old at this point. Harley needed to once again redefine itself for the new world, or sales were going to keep declining. So Harley would set out into multiple new ventures, investing millions and millions into electric motorcycle development, also into liquid cooling and into making smaller street bikes. Some of these things didn't pan out. Oh, speaking of Pan, there's of course the Pan America Adventure motorcycle. Some of these moves proved to be really valuable, others didn't. But regardless, there's no denying that Harley was facing a bit of an identity crisis despite all of their innovation. On top of all this, American brand Indian had made one of the strongest comebacks in motorcycle history. Indian was a new kind of threat for Harley, as they made the same kinds of motorcycles as Harley did, but almost better in every way. And so the board decided to bring in a new CEO in hopes of getting Harley out of a sort of never-ending sales and revenue decline. And this is where things get a little bit strange. Now, prior to 2020, Matt Levatich had served as Harley's CEO for 5 years. Levatich is most known, I would say, for Harley's development of the Livewire, as well as the Pan America and the Revolution engine. Though some of these things wouldn't come out until shortly after Levatich was replaced, they are things that obviously Harley had been working on. In 2020, Levatich resigned, and Harley decided to make this guy, Jochen Zeitz, I think I'm saying that right, the new CEO of Harley. Zeitz was most well known for reviving Puma in the 1990s. 80s, and no doubt they saw potential in what he had done with that business and some others. Now, some will give the impression that Harley just went out and picked this random German businessman. In all reality, Zeitz was very much familiar with Harley's struggles because he'd served on their board since '07, even though it is maybe preferred that a company like Harley, one that's so tied to American culture and history, be ran by an American. For me, it's more about the person's history. I would want the CEO of Harley to be more than just a businessman. Whether they're from America or Europe or Canada, if they're lifelong Harley guys that maybe grew up sitting on their dad's Harleys, I mean, yeah, sure, that would make it more likely that they're American, but that's the kind of thing that I think would matter. But that isn't really the case here, and a lot of people don't like it. Does it really matter where a CEO is from? In my opinion, it doesn't necessarily. If MV Agusta can have a Russian CEO, then maybe Harley can have a German one. I don't know. What really matters is what he's doing and what Harley's doing, not, where he's from. During Zeitz's time, he's piggybacked on what was set out under Levitich, a push towards bringing in new kinds of riders, specifically more female riders. Of course, the investment in electric motorcycle development, which has been an entire just gigantic flop for Harley-Davidson. The Hardwire plan, which was a push towards profitability and brand desirability, has done the exact opposite, despite some pretty cool motorcycles coming out. But their new models haven't really compelled non-Harley riders, and they're doing away with certain models. It's pushed away some of the diehards. The only crowd really left is those purchasing those premium high-end baggers. That's kind of Harley's bread and butter. There's no denying that since Zeitz took over, Harley has been on one of its steepest declines in history. In forecasting sales for 2024, Zeitz predicted profits to be down somewhere between 5 to 9%, but what we now know that 2024 is over is that 11% would be the actual number, with 2024's fourth quarter revenue being down 35%. For the full year in 2025, the company expects that Harley-Davidson Motor Company revenue would be down 5% and operating income margin of 7 to 8%. Harley-Davidson Financial Services would have an operating income down 10 to 15%. And get this, for the Livewire, electric motorcycle unit sales of around 1,000 to 1,500 and an operating loss of 70 to 80 million. I've never seen a Livewire ever out on the road. I don't know where they're getting even 1,000 to 1,500 sales. I feel like no one is buying these motorcycles. But here's the thing. Forget about all the whining about politics and brand identity. Whatever. All I care about are the motorcycles you're developing. If Harley made a motorcycle that was compelling, I would consider buying one. But they're not for me. What is Harley's lineup right now? And does it make sense for the average American rider, or really any American riders? Do your motorcycles still speak to people and resonate with them the way that they did 20 or 30 years ago? That's the question. In the recent video by TJ Brutal Customs, he claims that the cheapest Harley you can get is $16K. He's conveniently leaving out Harley's actual cheapest model, which is the Nightster, which starts right around, $10K. And he also says that Honda and Indian have these $8,000 cruisers. Now, it is true that the Indian Scout is maybe a better bang for your buck than the Nightster. It's probably the bike I would pick, but just because it's cooler. But it's all preference. There's pros and cons to both. The Sportster SS is much more on paper as a motorcycle than the Scout. It's better in almost every way, and yet I just feel like people aren't really buying them. Still, I would agree that Harley needs more compelling, affordable motorcycles, but it really doesn't appear as though that's going to happen anytime soon, especially now that all of these massive, comprehensive tariffs are coming in, ones that really don't at all benefit Harley, as Harley makes their motorcycles all over the world. These tariffs are nothing like the ones from the 80s, we'll just put it that way. Anyways, it's difficult to see Harleys getting more affordable, and I'll be completely honest, I have no clue what Harley should do, aside from obviously nixing the Livewire project. Nobody cares about electric motorcycles. The fact that Harley is investing and losing this much on electric motorcycles just shows that they don't understand their brand at this point, and they don't understand their customers. It's a giant waste of money, but I don't know what their path is forward. They've worked hard to actually make entirely new motorcycles over the past 7 years, many of which are pretty compelling and advanced, and it seems like nobody buys them. They seem to kind of have all of the problems that a motorcycle manufacturer can have. Overpriced models, a lack of brand identity, as well as a lack of interesting new development, also a lack of leadership and vision. It's kind of all there. And I'll be honest, that future where Harley doesn't exist as a manufacturer of new motorcycles, it's a scary one, but the more you look at the situation, it becomes more plausible. I would love to hear from you guys, especially those of you who've been around Harley your whole life and you've seen all the changes. Maybe you could shed some light on their predicament in the comments below. We'll see you guys in the next one. Ride safe.